Well, welcome everyone to BareLead. And if you're tuning in for the first time, this is where we strip down leadership to its raw, unfiltered, unabashed truths. I'm Pooja, and today we're going to be diving into an increasingly relevant topic of positioning in leadership. My guest is Becky. Welcome, Becky. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on BareLead.
Thank you, Pooja. I'm really excited to be here today because positioning is a very interesting topic, as you say, especially in the current world that we're living in. Just a brief intro of myself. I'm Becky Baker, and I've spent the last 30 years working in high-tech environments, helping brands and leaders position themselves. Super interested in this. But at 61, I had a positioning uh, issue for myself because I decided to switch careers. So I moved from being a copywriter to a personal branding strategist for women
Mm.
because I thought it was very important to help them work from their authentic core and to position themselves from that because I experienced a lot of people in my work life who were much more focused on positioning themselves to meet the needs of their ego and to satisfy the little beliefs they had about themselves that weren't always constructive. And what I learned for myself by going through that process, which is so interesting about positioning, is I thought, oh, I have to completely reposition myself. But what I discovered is no, it's about, I did have to get back in touch with how to tell my story, but nothing has changed about who I am. I still have the same values. I still have the same thoughts about business and people and how we connect with each other. And none of that's changed. The only thing that's changed is the context in which I'm doing my work. So for me, I'm going through this entire transition myself. So fascinating topic.
It sounds fascinating. I'm also very curious because before we dive into the core list of questions, so copywriting and brand positioning, they're kind of two ends of the spectrum. One is where you get the brief and then you kind of follow suit, and the other is where you shape the narrative to
Exactly.
begin with. So, how did you decide on that shift?
So this was my first experience with positioning for myself and why I found it's the core of everything I do. I was 3 years into my company.
Mm.
I had just moved to the Netherlands and I was always attracted to the commercial side of communications because my background is English and communication. But what I quickly discovered is as a copywriter, I was always looking at the process and I was always looking at the strategic focus. And it was something that nobody else was doing in the room in the way I could do it because I was looking from the outside in. And what I started talking to my customers about was I said, I don't want to do all of the technical stuff, in the campaigns. I want to focus on the strategic end because I think you're wasting a lot of time and money
Yeah,
because of inefficient process where the input you're getting in isn't great and the results you're getting are not great. And the whole process is just out of control. And I said, I see opportunities to improve that. And that's what I want to do. That's where I want to work.
yeah.
That was the first time I recognized how I perceived myself and how I wanted to position myself. And I actually found the words for that. And that just skyrocketed my career. That's all I can say. Within 3 weeks, they pulled me into this huge strategic project and it just got the ball rolling. But it all started because I had a different perception of who I was, and I learned how to communicate that.
Fantastic. It's a case in action. So
Yeah.
amazing. Now you spearhead, what positioning stands for women. And I want to ask you, Becky, because, when it comes to positioning, a lot of people kind of confuse it with visibility or just personal branding. But what exactly does positioning mean in leadership, according to you?
Well, the way I've seen it play out in over and over again is positioning is really the third step in a process for me. It always starts with perception.
Mm.
And that's kind of the wake up moment for every professional is where they realize, oh, the way I perceive myself is different than how other people perceive me. There's usually a gap between that, but you have to understand that. And then you also have to take the step of being more intentional about how you communicate about yourself. That's really where personal branding starts. The process is getting clear on that. And it's not work you do in a vacuum. And a lot of leadership programs concentrate on this. It's very much about a 360 view of yourself as a leader. It's not just assuming that you have so many biases against yourself. You're so unobjective about looking at yourself. And it's also not about constructing a fake story.
Mm.
And the second, I think of it as the three P's. So you have first is perception, how do I see myself? How do others? Get clear on that. Then you can act on it. But also, there's this great space of presence. And I know you feel this when you're in a room with somebody, a good leader and any leader, they have a presence,
Yeah.
or good or bad. And how you make other people feel is something to also get in tune with, because once you understand that, you can just leverage the strengths you have, or you can also look at the weaknesses, identify those. And that's also a huge part of your positioning. This is all information you need to take in. Once you've got that clear, and you've also got your purpose clear for yourself, why do you want to do this? What do you want to accomplish as a leader? Then you can think about positioning.
Yeah.
And for me, positioning is really the effect you have on people around you, but it's also how you communicate about yourself and how you lean into that. And the minute you put words to that, it is so powerful. People can't read your mind.
Yeah.
You have to communicate.
Yeah. So purpose, presence, positioning. And I believe that, these are really strong pillars of how a leader is perceived. But at the same time, when the moments are tougher, like when people have to make difficult decisions, sometimes all three pillars get tested. So what does strong positioning look like when somebody's making a difficult decision?
Well, that for me is where it comes back to whether you've got a position that's based on your authentic core.
Mm.
Because you can tell when people are comfortable in their skin, they're comfortable with their position, their leader, their role in the team. And when they lean into those strengths and weaknesses, because it's okay to admit that you don't have all the answers. I mean, we expect so much of leaders these days. They have to be empathetic, they have to get the team going, they have to achieve amazing results, and they have to do everything else around that. That's just not realistic. I think when the going gets tough, the really authentic leaders I know, they're willing to admit, we can't do this alone. We have to get together, and I can't do this alone as leader. I need your help, and they have to lean into who they are and just show up as an authentic person.
Yeah. I think it's also there's a caveat there because there are organizations that really want fully ripe leaders, and there are organizations that tolerate a bit of vulnerability as you find your feet, right? Because if you're transitioning to bigger roles, there is that sense of imposter syndrome. There is that sense of, oh, I'm taking a big leap, and therefore, I don't have a lot of support here. But the moment you kind of expose those insecurities, I think sometimes your team takes it really well, and sometimes it just backfires. So I've also noticed that a lot of capable leaders are struggling, with visibility, with differentiation,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
influence. So why do you think that's happening specifically like in these few years leading up to now?
Well, I look at it through the lens of women now, really, because
Mhm.
that's what I'm tuned into. And
Yeah.
what I really see that, yeah, it amazes me on one hand, but it doesn't surprise me on another hand, because I have the same issues. Showing up as a leader is an incredibly vulnerable space to be in.
Yeah.
And women, especially, that what I notice is the higher they get up in an executive position or in the ranks of a company in terms of influence, the more it's all about fear. And it's not just this nebulous fear, it's very specific kinds of fear, fear of being judged, fear of not being valuable to the company. Women have incredible demands on themselves, and men have these to an extent too. But I really notice it with women. And women, as the higher up they get, the more fear they have of their success, that they're, by making a poor decision or doing the wrong thing, that they're going to lose everything they've gained, because it is very difficult for women to move up
Yeah.
certain positions. So I think there are very concrete types of fear that really affect women. And I'm really curious, Pooja, because I know you've had a lot of executive positions. Do you have you experienced that yourself, a fear of taking risks, or have you experienced where there's a lot at stake?
Yeah, I think for one, you are statistically outnumbered when you're in a leadership position.
Mm,
So you are a different voice in the room, even if somebody doesn't really name it out aloud. And therefore, you weigh your words a lot more than somebody else would, who looks like, everybody else in the room. The other thing is, I think when I was stepping into positions, there was this risk of irreversibility with decisions. So what tends to happen is that you think of it as like a life-defining decision, and therefore you either sit on it, you overthink it, or you're just so fearful of making hard calls because of how you're going to be perceived, even if you have the mandate to do it. And
sure.
sometimes you are asked to do it. But women are definitely judged a lot harsher than if like a man was taking the same decision and same call or reduction in headcount and so on. So I faced this real time, like there was a the way women are perceived for the same actions was very different. And there is an inherent bias across organizations that I've learned. The only thing is, do you let it get to your skin, under your skin?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think a lot of women do because they don't have support systems to survive these difficult decisions. So even if you're working on your positioning, but you're not really working on the support system to carry you through, it's really hard.
I think that's very applicable because um, once you get up to a certain level, yeah, there is so much pressure. And exactly what you're saying. I see this with women who are very capable, very accomplished, and they have kind of left behind their support system along the way.
Yeah,
And I know from a lot of the research that I've seen that, and a lot of the best practices for women to be successful in careers, they have to build this inner circle of support.
yeah,
It should be a combination of men and women, I believe, especially if you're talking about sponsors.
yeah,
But don't, and that's one of the first things, and I know I did it as a business owner too, is that's one of the first things you abandon in all your busyness is because you're so focused on the end goal and what you want to achieve, you forget you really have to have supporters around you.
yeah.
Otherwise, you're just not going to survive. And I also noticed that with men that they're much more confident about their decisions.
100%. I think they can work with 60% of details, and I think we wait for 90 to 100%.
Yeah. But again, I think when you're in the room, you feel when it's not real. That's the simplest way to say it. And I really know that when you're in a room with a woman who, in this case, who is centered and is in touch with who she is, you're going to feel that. And it brings a different sense to the room. And that's why I think organizations need 50-50 all
Yeah.
the way. You need those balancing factors.
Yeah, I think like that inner certainty always translates into the room as well. And Becky, in your opinion, how does strong positioning shape, trust and long-term leadership impact like across teams and industries?
Well, the interesting thing is, a lot of us think that this is how I was raised, you go into a professional situation and you sort of leave your personal stuff behind. You go into work, you put on your little outfit, your professional outfit, and you put on your professional mask. And of course, you're always going to try to show the best side of yourself.
Yeah.
But actually, what research shows is that there's a whole lot of other very interesting aspects of you personally that are what determines whether you build trust with people or not.
Hmm.
And one of those is just how you show up in terms of enthusiasm and passion and conviction. And that goes again back to when you're speaking from your core, when you're doing the work that you want to do. And I know you do this, Pooja, that you're now in a space where you're doing something you just love. And when you talk about that, whether it's your fashion brand or whether it's your executive coaching, that conviction comes through. Those sort of intrinsic elements that make all of the difference. And that's what builds trust with people because business is not processes. It is not systems. It is not KPIs. It's people. It's
Yeah.
people, people, people. And the only way you get anything done in business is by having a connection with people. If you do not have that, if you don't have credibility and you haven't showed up, every single day of work and been there for your team, then you're not going to have the trust.
Yeah.
But it does. It starts with making the connection with people. It's pretty simple in the end, I think.
Yeah. And I also want to bring you to this point where, that whole sense of personal connection and personal thought process and how build relations with people is increasingly being guided by AI. It's becoming a noisy world. It's becoming a homogeneous world when it comes to thought processes. Everybody's writing very similar prompts, and therefore you see the content also delivering monotony. If you look at LinkedIn, for example. So how can leaders actually position themselves with clarity and also without becoming performative when AI is running the show, or at least the back end?
Yeah. It's a huge temptation because AI makes us look perfect.
Yeah.
And again, it's that ego thing. I fall into the same trap. I use AI too, but I'm a writer, so I think, and an editor, so I think I have a few little techniques I can use to help me. But it all comes back to, I'm always asking myself with anything they come up with is, would I actually say this in a real conversation? I always think I'm talking to my best friend.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of tests. And is this actually how I feel about this? Is
Mm.
this actually what I think about this topic? I think AI is really the lazy man's way of positioning yourself. And
Yeah.
it's not going to be authentic. But the good news is that everybody, and I see this with a lot of leaders, there's a lot of competition. You think everybody's giving the same story, but you have inside yourself, every single person has a whole universe of stories, experiences, points of view. If you just take the time to dig into that, and that's what my personal branding process is about, is let's find out what are your unique stories. I was sitting with a woman yesterday who's from Morocco, and she's in sales and she's worked at different companies. I said, well, and she told me three amazing stories that were just unique to her. Nobody else can tell those stories. Pooja, you have an amazing story to tell with what you're doing now. The fact that you're, on the one hand, you're doing a fashion brand, on the other hand, you're doing executive coaching. Fascinating worlds. Those make you unique. They make you interesting. So, but you have to be willing to take the time to dig those stories out for yourself and to tell them. Again, you have to do the work. And AI isn't going to do that for you.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot of intentionality and also the filter that you mentioned about, is this how I really feel? And can I have this as a human conversation? I think that filter is really missing. And somehow I was in a conversation with Dr. Julia last week, and we spoke about cognitive surrender. And I think that's also what's happening. And I think people are increasingly becoming performative because this is just becoming more and more acceptable. Like this is the kind of content that sells or, runs the show, and people are not questioning it. So I think there's a lot of personal responsibility in your answer there. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, your insights, your framework. This was amazing for me to hear. And I am going to reflect on the duality that I personally carry with my brand. And I'm going to write more about the fashion side of things as well. So that's my takeaway. And
Yeah.
I'm sure this is also going to resonate with a lot of our listeners. And before we wrap up, Becky, is there anything that you want to tell our listeners?
Yeah, I think what it all comes down to me is no, if you're thinking about positioning, which sounds so artificial, it's not artificial. It's about knowing what you stand for so clearly that others can feel it. I know exactly what I stand for. And that's helping women show up so that they can make a difference in our world. That's why I do everything I do. And that's how I feel. And that's when you can show that, people are going to start to follow you or not. They may not be in your tribe. I'm not here for everybody, but just get in touch with what lights you up.
Yeah.
That is going to make a difference.
You do that very well, which is why when I reached out to you, I was like, I know exactly the topic I want to ask you. So thank you for being such a beautiful example of positioning yourself.
Well, thank you, Pooja, because you are a great example too. You are a super role model for other women. So fantastic.
Thank you. Very touched. And thank you for joining us today. And thanks for everyone who tuned into BareLead. If you love this conversation, you can follow, subscribe, or leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Music or where you're watching us. I'm Pooja. I'll see you next time for more raw, stripped down leadership truths. And until then, keep it real.